where should they be allowed?
Lisa, sorry.
I'm sure this will be no surprise. My option is A, and I'm going to cover a few reasons. So attached ADUs are already allowed in single-family neighborhoods. Homeowners already have the option to create additional private areas, secondary units, that they can rent out for extra income, help the elderly in place, or support parents or adult children who are in need of assistance. So attached ADUs are allowed, so additional infill opportunities are provided, which will provide additional housing choices. I think what we should be looking at is Happy Valley has come forward and, in my opinion, has done the things correctly. They involved their neighborhood. They had meetings. They compromised and came up with a plan. They set a date or a number that they would have an evaluation before they expanded it. I think other neighborhoods should have that opportunity to follow that same kind of pathway. I wish we were sitting here right now looking at ways that we could possibly create a pathway where it's not wholesale across every single neighborhood and try to figure out a one-size-fits-all. If we were here looking at a way that we can set up conditional use, where that would allow a homeowner to be able to apply for a permit for site-specific tailored proposal that would allow for more flexibility. And, you know, if neighbors weren't opposed to it, it wouldn't necessarily even, from what I understand, require a hearing. This particular proposal to allow detached ADUs across all neighborhoods using kind of a top-down cookie-cutter approach, which does not consider the constraints, uniqueness, or real opportunities based on lot size or density and neighborhoods, has been a very divisive proposal that has come forward. In the fall of 2006, the City of Bellingham offered the Planning Academy for residents across all neighborhoods. From the Planning Academy, quote, "The sessions provide the foundation for neighborhoods to embark on a priority neighborhood code amendment proposal for submitting to the city." End quote. Neighborhoods took up this challenge. Our neighbors spent thousands of collective hours working together, holding meetings, involving their neighbors and the businesses within their zones. And then through that open meeting, they came together with their neighborhood plans. The accumulation of this effort was not easy, but I think a lot of neighborhoods were able to decide what was appropriate infill, identify areas for expansion and for higher density. They addressed their transportation issues, parks. They even reduced parking requirements in areas to incentivize growth. A really good example of that is Eleanor Apartments that York fought hard to be, not fought hard, but they really worked hard to work with the property owners and the city to ensure that the appropriate high-density infill would happen there versus like a drive-up window pharmacy. Also, the Aloha property is another really good example of neighborhoods working together to try to increase density and not only affordable housing for people who are in transition or elderly, but also really kind of working with the developer on wanting to have market rate housing so that there was a good mixed use. I think that is a good example of residents coming together and stewarding their neighborhoods forward. We have had to endure a lot of political name-calling over the last 2 years, which has greatly eroded our democracy. It has been, for me, very troubling reading a lot of comments or having people come forward and then trying to marginalize the people, the single-family homeowners who have opposition to this by referring to them as gray-haired, retired, wealthy, segregationist, NIMBY homeowners. Those gray-hair homeowners were the people at one time who were young activists in our city who try to steward our town forward. And I think they did a darn good job because we would all admit that Bellingham is a great place to live. For those of you who may not have been involved early on in our city as it went through some struggle and transition, a little history about that stewardship. When the commercial development went north and we had mall sprawl, the residents rallied around the downtown core because it was on life support. We rallied and said that buy local was important, and it wasn't just a rally cry, it was the way we started living our life. And now take a look at how vibrant our downtown is because of that investment. We came forward and proposed to tax ourselves through the Greenway levy, and we've done that multiple times so that we would be able to increase our parks, increase our green corridors and green belts, and expand our parks and trails. Those NIMBYs not long ago were your South Side YIMBYs who gathered together, and they didn't want to see a large development over a huge, beautiful tract of land, so they decided to propose a taxation on their property that is not across the whole city. It's on a section of a community that was able to help raise that money so that property, the 100-acre woods, is set aside so that we could all enjoy it. I can't remember a Bellingham school bond not passing. We have always supported to try to support our schools. We taxed ourselves to create the homeless levy, the housing fund, and also we taxed ourselves additionally through votes so that we can increase our alternative transportation upgrades. I think we've done a pretty good job, but what makes Bellingham great is the community and the values that we share. And now we want to ignore those voices who want to have a voice in how their neighborhood grows. The land use chapter in our 2016 comp plan states that the desire to promote the efficient use of land through a system of mixed-use urban villages and corridors, and to promote compatible infill development to maintain Bellingham's sense of place by protecting and enhancing the character of existing neighborhoods. Let the neighborhoods have a voice, and those residents come together and decide how best to enhance their own unique character and what compatible infill looks like. Again, like Happy Valley has had the opportunity to do. Within the last few lines of our comp plan housing chapter, it states it provides framework for promoting a diverse housing supply, protecting and improving the health and livability of our city neighborhoods. Without a SEPA review, how do we know that this major change to our zoning is going to meet that statement? The plan could affect over 13,000 homes in the single-family neighborhoods. How many will build an ADU? Who knows? But we don't make plans for today or next year. We make our plans based on a 20-year horizon or longer. So what we do now just doesn't impact something on a short term. This impacts the future of the Bellingham and their single-family neighborhoods. I personally feel that the city's issuance of a determination of non-significance may technically be correct since it's not addressing one single project. But I think collectively and accumulatively, the effect is significant as we go forward with the development. But I think the taxpayers deserve to know the outcome of a SEPA review. What is going to be the impacts on our parks? What's going to be the impacts on our infrastructure? What's going to be an impact on our parking, our transportation, our schools, our waterways? The more impermeable surfaces we put in our neighborhoods, it's going to affect our water quality, and we don't have the information to make a good decision. So people talk about the environment and their concern. When we get rid of a lot of trees, green space, it's going to have an impact. So I would like to see a SEPA review so that we can go forward and make smart choices that are informed so that we know what possibilities there are or how to mitigate some of the negative impacts. Am I against ADUs? No. Am I against DADUs? No. I think they're a good housing option in the right condition, but I don't believe there's a one-size-fits-all. And I think if we try to sit here and come up with one plan for all 24 neighborhoods, I think we're going to fail. We're not going to be able to address all the possible negative impacts. If we think that we can say what would be good on a 20,000 square foot lot would be the same as on a 5,000 square foot lot, we are kidding ourselves. That's why I wish we were looking at a way that we could create a system where a homeowner could come forward and they can show site-specific how they're going to build a detached ADU. Neighbors would have the opportunity to look at it and make sure that they have a voice, how it would impact them. I think we should be creating a pathway to create it, not a pathway to just have a blanket rule. I'd like to see us to legitimize a way for the current detached ADUs that are in existence. I think it's unfortunate there are individuals out there who have bought homes thinking it was legal and then to find out that it's not. If they are owner-occupied and they can pass a health and safety inspection, I wish we would be addressing now a pathway to be able to have those people come forward so that they could be permitted. I think that would be a good first step. I have a problem with this process, and that's why I think I get kind of passionate about it. After 2 work sessions, our city finally met with the Mayor's Neighborhood Advisory Committee to announce these intentions. I believe that was in December. That is 2 work sessions and a few months after we started this process. Once they've informed MNAC representatives, they have not had an opportunity to go back to their neighborhoods and inform them what was going on. Some of those neighborhoods only meet 2 or 3 times a year, so they haven't been able to educate or inform the residents of their communities so that they could get feedback on this proposal. It wasn't until December 20th that this change from originally Happy Valley Amendment to their neighborhood plan was reissued into a public notice that informed the community that this is a possibility to go citywide. Has the city met with all 25 neighborhoods? The answer is no. I don't blame city staff for that. It is a huge endeavor to make outreach to go to all city neighborhoods and let them know what's happening. I don't think the residents of Bellingham know the extent of this proposal. We saw a lot of people come forward, and there was a groundswell to that, but we're reading just from the other day, people saying, I just found out about this, and that's unfortunate. I think there's going to be a lot of people over the next few months who have missed the boat and an opportunity to speak to this. The process, I believe in the neighborhoods being able to come forward. And if this is something that the city really wants to accomplish, then I think that the neighborhoods should have a voice in it. The city should meet with the neighborhoods at a neighborhood meeting, propose the possibilities and ask them to look at their neighborhood plan. There are neighbors in each side of the fence in every neighborhood. The people who are passionate about coming forward saying they want detached ADUs, go to your neighborhood meeting and speak up. The people who are for it but would like to have some conditions, start envisioning how this could be implemented. What can happen in York neighborhood is something completely different than what is going to happen in Happy Valley or Birchwood, because the topography, the land base, the housing types, they are so varied. And so what would be appropriate for one would not be appropriate for another. I think we can accomplish this, but if we just decide on our side that we are going to implement this and then the city council goes forward with it, you are taking away the voice of the neighborhoods. You're taking away a voice of a lot of the citizens who have invested a tremendous amount. This is not going to create affordable housing. We've had people from the realty company come forward and say that's not the case. This is not going to create affordable housing. If I have to leverage my mortgage and pull out $150,000 to build a detached ADU, I'm not going to be renting it at a HUD level rate for people who can't afford to rent a house. It's not going to be cheap. And it's not going to help first-time home buyers. And so there is an illusion that this creates affordability. If I build a detached ADU on my property, I have increased the value of my property significantly. Do you think it's going to sell for the same price if there was just a house present? How are we going to get the young people who came forward and spoke about the desire to have home ownership and they can barely afford their rent and they're struggling to try to get a down payment, how do we sit there and say, now that we are going to create detached ADUs on what could be a starter home, you are now going to have to come up with a significant amount more money. We are pushing that goalpost farther down the line for people to be able to afford housing. So with that, I know we're not supposed to we said we want to make motions, but I am going to make a motion just to put it out there, so if anybody seconds and there's a discussion, I move we adopt the staff's recommendation to allow detached ADUs in single-family zone areas on a per neighborhood basis by legislative action.
I'll second.
Okay, so there's a motion and a second. And that motion was to allow, I'm sorry, Lisa, exactly, it was to allow detached ADUs on a per neighborhood basis? Is that the,
I move to adopt staff's recommendation
Yeah.
to allow detached ADUs in single-family zone areas on a per neighborhood basis
Okay.
by legislative action.
thank you. Thank you for the second.
Second.
Thank you for all those comments. And I think we'll probably end up circling back to a lot of them in the discussion. Now that there's a motion and a second, we can discuss that further. And really probably discuss both sides of that within the context of that motion. And is there anybody else who'd like to follow up? I'm sure other people would, but anybody who wants to speak? Phyllis?
Well, I would just like to say that I've been struggling with the same thing and thinking, you're trying to make one size fits all, and then you're trying to make it open enough so that you're not doing the one size fits all. And I think Lisa's proposal addresses that.
Iris?
I'm opposed to this proposal for a number of reasons. Excuse me. Still getting over a little cold. I think the main reason that I originally proposed a citywide approach to putting together a framework that would allow detached ADUs is based on the background knowledge of a political scientist that neighborhoods, that people generally are going to support something broadly, a policy broadly, like detached ADUs, but when it comes to their own neighborhood are going to be less supportive of it. And that slows progress, and creating a neighborhood by neighborhood, neighborhood by neighborhood implementation of detached ADUs, I believe, would slow progress on something that is a really important piece of the puzzle to providing affordable housing. I don't think anyone has said that an ADU or a detached ADU is going to be a housing solution, but as one of the only renters in the room, every time people like to talk about affordable housing, and one person came up and shared that, oh my gosh, it might be $700, rent in Bellingham is a lot more than $700. And so providing another middle-of-the-road option for people who might right now be in a low-income housing space to be able to move up to a detached ADU or to a multifamily zone area is providing additional housing and is going to provide additional space in Bellingham for affordable housing. And so I would say in terms of an equity issue, in terms of a what is right policy, I know that it sounds like a lot of where you're coming from with this proposal is a good government angle of how do we best put this proposal forward and address this issue. And I believe that coming from the city to create a broad framework and implement this citywide is the best way to do so and is the correct way to do so. I think, like you said, every neighborhood's different, and every neighborhood association is also different and has a different level of power, and the community has a different balance. Our neighborhood association leadership is not elected citywide, and therefore I do not believe has the responsibility or the right to reflect the best interests of our city as a whole. And it's really important that every neighborhood has some skin in the game in growing for the future of our community. And I think that if we allow neighborhoods to individually make the decision of whether or not to allow for some additional growth and density, we'll be facing a crisis of housing, and we will not grow in a way that is safe, equitable, or inclusive or diverse in our community. I also believe in terms of the environmental impacts, I was really disappointed to hear so many people try to use that as a wedge on this issue when the environmental impacts of sprawl and of not having density are much stronger. One University of Illinois study listed the environmental impacts of sprawl, including air quality, urban heat islands, increased emissions, loss of farmland, loss of green space, loss of open space, flooding, degradation of watersheds, increased stormwater runoff, water supply encroachment, and water supply overconsumption. And our piece of the puzzle of this community and of Whatcom County is to be a dense urban core and is to ensure that our watershed is protected, that our farmland can be successful and productive, and that our community, our county as a whole, can grow in a way that is diverse, inclusive, and vibrant. And I believe that in order to do so, we need to take a more bold stance and act on this issue in a way that reflects the best community that we can be.
Thank you. Garrett, did you have your hand out?
You guys really got us started on a good one here. I see you put this conveniently at the top. For me, I've really been moved by a lot of the comment that we've received, the testimony. And we started this process in 2015. And what makes me supportive of citywide implementation is that this is about housing choice. And we've heard from a lot of people in all neighborhoods across the city that have been desirous of this housing form. And this goes back to our first work sessions on it. And it hasn't been just one neighborhood or two neighborhoods. It's been citywide. People want the option for this housing form. But I also think it's important to keep in context the scale of this. I mean, this isn't going to be 5,000 housing units built over the next 20 years. This is going to be a very, very small fraction of our housing stock, probably less than 1%. And there's data to support that. I spent some time on Seattle's website today and was looking at their program. They loosened the restrictions on detached ADUs like in 2007. From 2007 to 15, I think they had about 200, a little over 200 units, detached units built. So that's in a 9-year period. So 20-something units a year. They have 800,000 people in their metro area. We have 80. So, I mean, if you do the math, and we're 10% of their population, we're going to have we'd have 2 to 3 of these built in a year. So, in that context, we're not talking about huge impacts citywide. What we're talking about, for myself personally, is looking at providing housing options. There's a ton of language in our comp plan. The Growth Management Act supports it, providing options for people. I've talked to probably a dozen people that have legal ADUs, and the primary use for those folks is disabled adult children, elderly parents. It's allowing people to age in place. We heard testimony from people that said, hey, this is how we started. My wife and I got an ADU. It was affordable for us. We saved money. We've had some great testimony of that. So for me, all along, it's been about options. I think if we were looking at things on a neighborhood-to-neighborhood basis, I think that's sort of a negation of our mandate. We're supposed to look citywide. We're supposed to do the hard work. We're supposed to listen to 5 hours of testimony, and that's what we're doing. This is going on 3 years. And our job is to come up with a citywide ordinance that's applied for the next 20 years. And so I support option B, but I appreciate you tabling the motion and starting us off on a good conversation, because it needs to be had. We need to work past this, and then we'll see where we end up.
Thank you. Mike?
Yeah, I'm not supportive of the motion, and I think ADUs citywide is what I prefer. listening to the whole of the testimony we received, written and oral, I don't think we can do that, the bulk of those comments justice by saying neighborhood by neighborhood, which has been the process of the last 20 years, and we haven't seen that happen until a year ago with Happy Valley. Going neighborhood by neighborhood is essentially saying no to a lot of those voices that are asking for options. And when you go over the issues sheet, a lot of the hesitancy has to do with issues that are tangent a little bit, whether that's abuses in the rental system, which we need to work to address, and hopefully we'll be talking more about later this year. A lot of the issues are made worse by inaction. And I mean, issues of privacy, design, shade. The alternative to an ADU, the land values of our lots in the city are rising to the point where some of the smaller, older houses that aren't either big enough or desirable anymore are over time going to get torn down. And what will be built in their place is a big box. And if you drive around, you're starting to see that more and more. You take any opposition on this list, an opposition point on this list, and it's made much worse by a new single-family teardown. Single-family rules are the same across all neighborhoods: 5,500 square feet, 35 feet tall, 70% lot coverage. Blows any ADU opposition, any issue that an ADU, according to these rules, can allow out of the water. We don't restrict single-family construction in any way, neighborhood by neighborhood. I think we've talked about this in the past. The detached ADU may very well prevent a teardown. That it's an alternative, and it's an alternative that is going to cost less than that teardown, and the current owner might be able to accomplish. It's still a big ask. It's going to happen really slowly. On the affordability piece, I keep hearing these quotes and calculations about mortgages and what that pencils out to the rent on that particular unit. The point of a DADU or any ADU is not that that's necessarily going to be HUD, poverty level income affordable. It's that the person who moves in there is going to free up something down the line. Someone talked in a public comment about the butterfly effect. You go on down the chain, and an apartment in Birchwood might be slower to increase its rent because we have, over 10 years, 200 more ADUs or something. It's not that the brand new ADU is going to be necessarily affordable, but that pipeline of supply has a very small piece of effect of positive impact on affordability. I think those are the main points I wanted to make.
Thank you. Lisa?
So as far as thinking that detached ADUs is going to prevent urban sprawl, I don't think that's kind of, for me, a hollow argument, because we have our urban growth areas and our boundaries, and we decided as a city we weren't moving into the three of them. They're kind of left aside as a savings account so that we can move into them as needed. But we looked at doing urban villages to increase most of our density. Our single-family neighborhoods surround those urban villages. I just keep thinking over time, I don't want us to take a step that turns us towards being a downtown core of Seattle in 50 years. I think the green space in our single-family neighborhoods is going to be something that will be a treasure for the future. I don't necessarily agree with the trickle-down housing either. As far as if I build an ADU, somebody moves in there and moves out of something a little less affordable. Haven't necessarily seen anything written on that as being a trend. And I know I'm not going to convince everyone, but I'm really disappointed that as a body we're not looking at a situation where we're creating a pathway through it, like a conditional use, so that it's site-specific and the uniqueness of an area can be really utilized. And then Yeah, it's disappointing because I think we had good opportunity to try to figure out a way to legalize the ones that are out there currently so that we could fulfill H9 and know how many we have, start daylighting those if they can be legalized, and then just find a way so that it's just not citywide, but having a pathway created that if an individual wanted to pursue it, regardless of neighborhood, we would have developed a pathway that could have happened appropriately.
Garrett? I'd just like to make a brief comment at this time related to the urban sprawl component that was discussed in your comments, Lisa, because we can't, we talk a lot about these things in a vacuum. You know, we say detached ADUs aren't the solution to urban sprawl, and they're not. And in urban villages aren't the solution to urban sprawl. And more single-family homes aren't. And big apartments in our downtown aren't. Individually, but collectively, all of these actions address that issue. And if we start picking and choosing which ones we want to implement, then we get into that world of that we've been talking about, we've been hearing about exclusion. Like, we're going to address our problem this way with the impacts from that disproportionately placed on a certain segment of the community potentially. And it's not fair to say this isn't the solution, so we shouldn't do it, because we have to look at everything. We are in a crisis. And if we cherry pick the solutions, we won't end up with the result we want. And I've been saying this, I think, for years on this topic through the comprehensive plan update, is this is about doing everything. Not choosing which one to do, but doing everything. And if we don't do everything, we will get urban sprawl, because Bellingham chose to say these urban growth areas we're not going to expand to. We're not going to expand our boundary. And I work in this industry, and I can tell you the result of that is already being felt. And what's happening is people are building and moving to Ferndale, and Ferndale is growing. And we don't control the decisions that Ferndale community members and politicians make about how they grow their boundaries into our agricultural lands, which they're a lot closer to. And if you look at the statistics, Ferndale is growing in a single-family context faster than we are. And that's where starter homes are. There's no such thing as a starter home in Bellingham anymore. There just isn't. The cheapest home you can buy is for sale right now on Queen Street. It's 1,000 square feet with no parking, and it's $300,000. That's $300 a square foot for a two-bedroom home. So, you know, we're driving people out of our community with the choices we make. And I can also tell you that we have 18,000 5-acre lots, I believe, in our county, and the growth will proliferate onto those lots if we don't do everything to capture those people. And so the risk of sprawl is real, not just because of DADUs or urban village efforts, but it's already happening. People are coming here and going, I can't buy a house in Bellingham, so I'm going to go buy 5 acres. Or I'm going to go move to Ferndale or Linden. And Bellingham is the job center of our county, and that means those people are probably driving to our community to work. And so I think that we have to be truthful about the narrative, and it's not about picking one or the other. It's about doing everything collectively in a controlled fashion, and I believe that we can do that. And I'd like to talk about why I think a good ordinance could address those concerns about control later. But that's just my comment on urban sprawl, because I think that's not what we should be talking about. We shouldn't be saying, let's pick this or that. We should be picking everything. Garrett, did you have a comment?
I just look at our list, we got a lot to go through. I think we should call the question on this and keep moving.
I would like to say one more thing if we're going to do that, and that's that I sympathize with the concerns that are in our neighborhoods, but I support the idea of this being a citywide process, because we will inevitably have islands of people who decide that they don't want to support what is a community-wide issue. And that's my greatest concern with it. Number one is the equity issue and how we address our growth issues. But then other than that, I have to speak to what you said, Garrett, which is that this is not going to dramatically alter our community overnight. Today, you are allowed to build an 800 square foot detached accessory structure on your property. And if you want to put living space or a bathroom in that detached accessory structure, you can, totally legally. So this isn't about losing green space. You can already take up all that green space. And like Mike said, you could build a 5,500 square foot single family home if the lot was big enough. And I live in the Columbia neighborhood. And if you drive through the Columbia neighborhood or any neighborhood in our city that has an alley, you will see a proliferation of detached accessory structures, many of which are 800 square feet. And so I struggle in this entire 3-year process we've gone through to understand the fear that has been put into this narrative about the change in the character of our community, because the only change I see is we're talking about putting people that aren't part of the primary family in the backyard. The only difference between this ordinance, if it's approved, and the current regulations would be that detached 800 square foot structure, someone else could live in. And that's the root of it. I could build that space without a kitchen and put my mom back there. This is about people. And so let's be real about that too, because we're not really dramatically altering what you can and can't do with your property in a single family neighborhood. We're just talking about allowing you to have someone else that isn't part of your family live with you. And so for me, those are the two things that I have to speak about, because we get to tackle this topic right at the gates, and those are what are most important to me. Iris, do you have something?
I had one more thing to say. I think in talking about neighborhoods, and I've been thinking a lot about the different neighborhoods that I've lived in Bellingham over the years, whether it's growing up in the Birchwood neighborhood, where my family has a large lot where we were able to have that big garden space, to living up by Western, being in a smaller apartment that made a lot of sense and allowed me to be close to the university, to now living in the Leonard Streets neighborhood and feeling really close to downtown, yet still in a neighborhood and in a neighborhood and in a duplex where I feel like we're making a lot of good use of our space. And thinking about how those neighborhoods have shaped me growing up here. And I was reading a really compelling Harvard study that showed how where a child grows up really impacts who they become and their success in life. And for us to say, this neighborhood is full and you need to grow up outside of Bellingham, you need to grow up further away from our downtown core, you need to grow up further away from some of our parks, from our schools, you need to drive cars to get to school. I think that is a tragedy, and we need to be looking, like you said, several generations ahead, not just of my generation looking to be able to buy a house, but where my kids are going to be able to grow up. And so I think that's another important reason that, for me, that it's guiding my decision.
Phyllis?
Fabulous conversation. Boy, I love it.
Thank you. So they gave us this question right out the gates. As Garrett noted, we discussed it. Is there more comment at this time on the motion? Okay, then we need to vote on it. I will restate the motion, I'm sorry. There's been a lot of discussion there. So the motion was to accept the city's recommendation, or support the city's recommendation to allow detached ADUs in single-family neighborhoods on a neighborhood-by-neighborhood basis through a legislative process. Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No. Okay, that motion fails 4-2. So we don't have a decision on this topic. We can have additional discussion.
Well, I think the
Iris, sorry.
Oh, sorry, sure.
I'd like to make a motion to allow detached accessory dwelling units citywide.
Second.
Okay, so I'm going to restate that just with a little bit different language, but the intent, tell me if I've got it okay. So there's a motion to recommend to allow detached ADUs on a citywide basis. And a second. And that was from Mike? Okay.
Sure.
Just for Heather's benefit. Okay, so we talked about this issue. Obviously, everybody shared their opinions on it, on Lisa's motion. If anyone wants to make additional comment, that's totally fine. Now's the time. Lisa, I know you're probably not going to support this. If you want to speak against it, you're welcome to. Anybody's welcome to comment further. This is the opportunity.
No, I'm not going to continue to belabor it because it won't change the outcome of it, but just getting ready for the next phase.
Okay. Anybody else? Iris, want to speak to your motion? You've also shared.
Yeah, I think I've shared plenty. I just want to say that I think one thing that'll be important that I'd like to talk about next, moving past this, is then getting to understand how the city will present this recommendation to city council, knowing that it's not necessarily what you all came with originally. And I liked the way it was written in the packet, but I would love to talk about that maybe at our next meeting as well.
Thank you. I think that's important for all of us as a body to hear, and because there's dissenting voices and supporting voices, and I think it would be appropriate to talk about that on the 15th, because, Greg, you'll have whatever this outcome of this vote is, you'll have a draft findings of fact, which will it'll be staff's attempt to kind of like summarize what we all just did, and right? And
Yeah,
that would be the appropriate time to discuss that?
Yeah, it'd be real important that you review the findings in light of whatever happens tonight and the direction you give us tonight. But we want to make sure that those findings reflect the conversation that you had, the reasons that you're recommending what you are, and then that's what goes forward to City Council. So we need to pay particular attention to those findings next time. The other thing is I want to point out is that these tonight, I believe these are straw votes, right? You're not making
Yeah.
final recommendations. This is a straw vote. And what you basically told us just now was the draft ordinance, the preliminary guidance that you gave us before, you're to stay with that. So that's consistent, and we can use that sort of format as we go through, because you've given us preliminary guidance, and the question, as I said, is, do you want to make changes to that preliminary guidance?
Yeah.
Clearly, you don't with that issue that you just discussed. So
Well, thank you for making that clear. I forgot to mention that our intent is to give guidance to staff. We'll have a vote on the overall ordinance, which could incorporate changes in 2 weeks, but it doesn't have to change the nature of the motion. It's just so everybody understands what it's about. So thank you. Okay.
acknowledgement that these are straw votes, not a
Yeah.
final vote.
And on some of this stuff, as we move on, we may even skinny up the process and not make actual motions. We'll see how that works. But before we're getting off topic a little bit here. There is a motion on the table. The motion was made by Iris to recommend that detached ADUs be allowed citywide. There was a second for that. It doesn't appear that there's any more discussion, so I think we should have a vote. So all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
No.
Okay, and so that is also 4-2.